Psychological safety, simple kind of layman's term definition for psychological safety is, do I feel safe enough to voice my opinion, especially when it's with let's say, someone that's in a leadership role above me, and especially if I disagree. Can I disagree with my boss is a great way to look at it. It's not the only place it shows up, but it's definitely a place to really, is it happening? Do I feel safe enough to disagree, to do it in a healthy way? And we can have that conversation, and then I can still walk out of that meeting and we're still in it together. We're still in the trenches. If nothing else, it's actually viewed as a positive because we have this healthy conversation, this healthy debate, if you want to call it, or conflict, and still be able to move forward. Do I feel safe enough in our environment to do that? And the reason we lynched into or kind of bid into this at Facial Lounge is because all the studies said the teams that really do this well, it was kind of a silver bullet to better production.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we're going to talk about a culture of psychological safety. When you think about that, you may not understand all of those words as they use together. But psychological safety is kind of the real cornerstone here. And it's been something that's been around for a while because of this Google study called Aristotle. I'm not going to unpack it today because our guests will talk about it. We have Eric McGrath. He is a CEO and co-founder of Facial Lounge Group. They recently made the Inc. list. And he says the driving force behind the success of their company and the stability and durability is a culture of psychological safety. What I like most about today's interview is the detail that he shares about what does it take as a leader to be able to create psychological safety. And then we also talk about what does the employee need to do, because it's a two-way street. And so you can look at this as a full playbook, or at least a high-level understanding of this. Maybe it's not all the details, but a culture of psychological safety is something that will drive more performance and higher bottom line, and that's good things. My name is Gene Hammett. I'm a CEO coach. I really help companies grow their business. We do that through CEO coaching, executive coaching, and leadership development, helping your people create leadership at all levels. We've got a lot of different tools. A lot of our companies are already in growth mode, but that comes with a bit of chaos. And many of our CEOs feel like they're the bottleneck of the company. They know they can grow faster, but they're not quite sure what's getting in the way. If you're curious about what it might be for you, come to one of our next live trainings that we do where you can sign up for free and you can get some insight around stop being the bottleneck of your company. Just go to training.coreelevation.com. That's our legal name, Core Elevation. So training.coreelevation.com, and you can find out more about how you can stop being the bottleneck of the growth of your company. Now, here's the interview with Eric. Eric, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you, Gene?
I am fantastic. We have a great conversation today talking about the culture of a psychological safety and the impact that makes in our organizations, performance-wise, leadership-wise. Eric, tell us about the company that you are the CEO of, Facial Lounge Group.
Yeah. So, is it about 8 years roughly ago, I actually met a woman named Amber Johnson, and she was an esthetician with a small group of estheticians that she was working with and really struggling to make all the business operations side work. And that happened to be my background. And so we started working together first, just in little bite-sized pieces, and then things started really moving. And shortly after, I became one of the partners or her partner in the business, and it's just really taken off ever since.
Well, when you jump in to do operations, and I know you had told me before we hit the recorder on, you took it from a couple of 100,000 to about 5 million in revenue, and I don't know if that's a secret or not, but what are some of the leverage points you had to get right in operations to get to 5 million?
I got to so Amber Johnson, this is probably one of the most extreme, wonderful human beings you're ever going to meet. And what I mean by that, she gives to everyone around her. She's a brilliant esthetician. And yet when it comes to systems or even as something as simple as maybe checking the mail, she generally fails at. And so the first place we started was we really started looking at the simple systems that were lacking in the business to help free her up to do what she was brilliant at, which had to do with marketing and events and being an esthetician. And so we started identifying key processes. believe it or not, such as mail. And we just created a simple process. And typically that simple process did not involve her. It involved, as often as we could, her not doing the process because she struggled with them so much. And as we dialed those in, more started becoming more and more clear. So every time we do a weekly meeting. In that weekly meeting, we identified pain points, struggles, challenges that were going on. We'd look at the financials and we look at some key metrics. And from there, we develop a kind of a hit list each week and who was doing that hit list. And we just stayed on track with that for probably over 12 months, but got some real traction right away.
Well, I know that there's a lot of leverage points inside that, but I appreciate the high level view. One of the things that I want to talk about today is we look at this because I think a lot of leaders don't understand what is psychological safety and why it's important.
Yeah.
Can you give us your perspective?
Yeah. So, when we're talking about what to do here and really what's caused Facial Lounge to take off, it was after we got through the, beginning phases, just a couple of team members, and we started growing, we expanded in new locations, all these things were going on. As we were looking at the culture, our kind of linchpin behind it is this term psychological safety, which I learned some years ago. There was a study by Google. You and I were just talking about it before, called Project Aristotle. And anybody that's interested out there, it's worth the read. It's a really interesting read because Google, they were in search of what built amazing teams and they wanted to duplicate them. They wanted to basically, it's Google, man. They love their data and they wanted to dig in and they want to go conquer the world with that data. And so they're like, what makes teams really outperform others? And so they went in and they studied, it was like a year or two, they studied what was making great teams, and they came back with a term zero correlation, meaning they studied all this data and they couldn't figure it out. It was more complex than what they'd come up with. And so they went back for a whole nother year, and I think they just took a wider approach to it and just really started, what are the commonalities? And they came up with 5 key metrics, but the number one was the most important. It was this term psychological safety. And psychological safety, simple kind of layman's term definition for psychological safety is, do I feel safe enough to voice my opinion, especially when it's with let's say someone that's in a leadership role above me, and especially if I disagree? Can I disagree with my boss is a great way to look at it. It's not the only place it shows up, but it's definitely a place to really, is it happening? Do I feel safe enough to disagree, to do it in a healthy way? And we can have that conversation. And then I can still walk out of that meeting and we're still in it together. We're still in the trenches. If nothing else, it's actually viewed as a positive because we have this healthy conversation, this healthy debate, if you want to call it, or conflict, and still be able to move forward. Do I feel safe enough in our environment to do that? And the reason we lynched into or kind of bid into this at Facial Lounge is because all the studies said the teams that really do this well, it was kind of a silver bullet to better production. And so we started pushing, and what was crazy at Facial Lounge is that estheticians by nature are usually more inward. They're kind of on the disc. They're kind of like that high S or C personality, generally speaking. And for those that don't know, those are just, they process deeper on the information that's going on. And a lot of times it doesn't come out of their mouth. And so getting them to speak and to feel safe enough to do it was a whole process in itself. But as we constantly work on it and constantly evolve, as we get better at it, the business gets better in turn. So that's kind of what we latched on to that was really working for us.
I'd love for you to look at what gets in the way of psychological safety. And this is from the leader's perspective. A lot of the people listening in here are CEOs or maybe top executives of fast growth companies. But what gets in the way of psychological safety?
Yeah. So first off, what a great question, because there's a lot, Gene. There's a lot. If we're looking at the collaborative nature of what goes on there, it's a version of trust, but it requires time. It requires good communication skills to be present. It requires an actual genuine curiosity what other people are saying versus, being authoritarian and just saying it the way it is or kind of pushing your agenda. It's creating these moments where we're having true conversation with the team and asking for feedback and asking to step in. Well, that requires a more evolved leader. It requires somebody that's not typically ego-based. They're not usually in there running around dictating what's going to happen. They're actually asking the right questions. They're curious, they care, and it shows. And so when people have a disagreement, they don't feel like they're threatening. The whole conversation doesn't feel threatening. It feels much more inviting. And so what's holding back from that? All the opposite of all those things. Maybe a leader or manager who doesn't have the higher level communication skills, or we're not taking the time to have the conversations and we're in go mode all the time solving emergencies, and it doesn't invite that collaboration. Or you just have one moment where the leader's having a bad day and they respond poorly. And if they don't do the work to kind of right size that, then people shut down for the long haul over just one incident. And there's many other things, but typically it comes down to just feeling safe is a whole genre in itself. And I do want to highlight, as you're asking the question, the other side of this, that's kind of the caring, supportive, open side. I would say it also shuts down psychological safety when there's no accountability. So if you don't have the other side, and so when things there's no boundary set around things, or people don't know where to walk, then a lot of times they don't open up or talk as well because they don't know where a misstep is and they don't know where those boundaries set up. So it's kind of both sides, having the care and openness, but also the accountability to be able to work within.
Let me break in here for a second. We've been talking about the enemies of psychological safety, and really that's what gets in the way. The main thing that you want to look at, if there is a main thing behind this, there's a lot of pieces, but it's about relationship. If people have the kind of relationship with you up front, it's agreed upon that you want them to share their ideas and you're open to those ideas and you make them feel like that consistently. It builds the relationship. And you're upfront about this is one of the key components to it, because you've got to have the conversation about what happens when you're sitting there thinking, I'm not sure if I should share this or not. You should share it anyway. We're not going to shame you. We're not going to judge you. It may not be appropriate, and we'll just say, hey, that's a really good ad. Maybe that fits in somewhere else. But you listen to people, make them feel appreciated and valued. Sometimes they'll have brilliant ideas. And if you're able to create that kind of culture, it really will help you create performance. Back to Eric. I would imagine that most employees, when you describe this to them, they might scoff at it because they've been in so many bad leadership situations and bad cultures and said, oh, that's just something someone read in a book or read on the online, or these days got out of ChatGPT.
That's real.
And it doesn't really, it's one of those things that doesn't really happen. I was just talking to a friend of mine, and she's actually really quite incredible leader, smart, driven. And she's got a contract that she's working with a guy who is not open to feedback. Mm-hmm. And I was like, so what does that feel like for you? And she's like, I don't feel like I can say anything. Yeah. And so I've been complacent and just a bystander. And I go, that's got to be awkward for you. And she almost broke down in tears when she was telling me this story. Mm-hmm. I bring up those kind of emotional moments because I'm wondering from your perspective, do employees, they get the concept, but where do they struggle to actually play their role in psychological safety? Because it's a two-way street.
Yeah. So it's funny, as you were talking, so I mentioned Amber Johnson. So her strengths, marketing, connecting with people, bringing in the business, promoting the brand, and she's brilliant. Her weaknesses are this internal and the leadership of maintaining the team and doing the things that you're talking about, those interactions. And so when she gets busy and frantic, she scares everybody, not meaning to. She's not coming from that place, but she might be more directive. She can be harsh at times, not, again, meaning to shut them down, but it'll come through that way. And every single time those events would show up as we were slowly getting her out of operations, we would, in some cases, we actually went through, especially like our front desk staff. I remember there was one situation where she just had a bad interaction. We lost like 4 employees right there. And what I mean by we lost 4 employees, they didn't quit on the spot. The psychological safety was broken, and it was getting it back when they're like, the head of the company that I hardly talk to, I don't feel like I have it. We couldn't get there. And so when you have these moments, to your point, you've got to be consistent as a leader. Your whole leadership team's got to be consistent, and especially in the heated moments, because if it's not showing up, then that's kind of the proving ground. When it gets tough, how are we showing up? And if we don't consistently show up that way, we're going to lose them. And they constantly have in the back of their head, they're like, okay, yeah, we're talking, just like you said, this is something they read somewhere, but we're not really putting it into practice. So it's got to be authentic. It's got to be the entire leadership team. And if there's mistakes, there's got to be ownership very quickly and rectification if we can get there.
We're talking about the culture of psychological safety. I'm kind of curious, if we were in meetings with your team, your culture, would there be anything different that we would see or sense? Maybe it's the way we question, or maybe it's just a ritual that you guys have put in place.
There's when you ask that question, there's one thing that stands out to me. So when we're in a meeting, like we run on EOS and we have L10s, which is a weekly meeting that's about an hour and a half long. And in that meeting, there is supposed to be problem solving together, where there's differences and different opinions, and a safe space for that to go on. But sometimes, for example, Gene, if you and I are seeing it in different perspectives, sometimes I could rub somebody sideways, and I think that's normal in meetings. We actually will stop the meeting if the communication is starting to go into some place that in any way is starting to shut down, and anybody can call it in the meeting going, hey, this is seeming a little bit past where we should be. What can we do to straighten this out? And if it can't be solved right there, they take a sidebar immediately and they start talking to it. So, and it's not about the conversation, it's about how we're having the conversation. And so when we focus in on how to have healthy conversations, and we're willing to stop what's taking place to create the healthy conversation, then the outcome is always a healthy space, or I would say 99% of the time we're landing in a much healthier space. And so we're not duplicating the bad behavior. I don't know if that's different from other meetings, but it's something that's really worked for us to help us kind of learn how to have these type of meetings, because we all have different behavior. We all have different history. And as you said, we got people that come into the company from a completely different culture and they don't even understand how to do this. So we kind of train it and teach it live moments by having the real conversation.
Hey, let me break in here for a second. We've been talking about a culture of psychological safety, and really it centers around being able to give feedback to people, give new ideas. And so many times when things go awry, you have an attitude or performance issue, you've got to address that. And the best way to address it is with a tough conversation. So I wrote the book with my wife, How to Have Tough Conversations. You can see it right here. You can buy it wherever you buy books. Page 35 is one page worth the entire purchase of the book, probably worth many, many times more, actually, because it will help you in your very next tough conversation. Get to page 35, the 4 phases of tough conversations, and it will help you dial in and maybe even show you where you're making some mistakes right now. Back to Eric. I love this conversation because I think a lot of people don't understand psychological safety. And if they don't understand that, they can't create a culture of psychological safety.
That's real.
Plain and simple. And so when we were talking about this, I was really thinking about how leaders play their role inside of psychological safety. And it is a two-way street. I mentioned that earlier, but let's talk about that just briefly, because if I offer someone psychological safety and you know, I really mean it, and they don't take it, it's not there. Yeah. If I don't offer it and I'm closed off to whatever the feedback is, and they're trying to give it to me, it's not there. So can we talk just a little bit about how the two-way street thing works within your culture?
Yeah. So I actually thinking of several places and conversations that are similar to what you just described, right? So you can have, and first of all, getting to the environment of a psychologically safe is an ongoing, I don't even think you ever arrive 100% where it's all perfect in every way, right? Every person, every mood, every day brings something a little bit different. And I think the real goal is to have this kind of growth-minded mindset towards it, to where we're more allowing of people to make mistakes if they're willing to own those mistakes, and we can work towards it. So if we're hiring well and we're hiring a growth-minded individual, which is sometimes kind of hard to predict in the future, especially through an interview process, then we have less of those situations. And we're kind of setting expectations from the beginning, but they still happen. And so when they happen, again, going back to, it's important to discuss kind of the expectations and what it means to work in this environment. And that's the accountability part. It's showing authentic care. I really care about our communication. I care about the culture. I care about what's going on. But care also can show up as, and we can't cross over this line if we're not open to feedback. Now, there's also, are you giving feedback in a healthy way? Are you delivering it well? You know, are you listening to both sides of this? But if you're having the conversations and both people are working towards solution, we're usually going to get there. The real issue is when we're not both working towards solution, we're working to be either right or hold our place and not hear the other side. And so to me, a lot of times it still comes back to the shift in the conversation. Most people want to talk about the issue instead of talking about how we're talking about the issue. And so if we spend the time talking about how we're getting there and setting expectations, setting people up for success, we have less of these. And when they do show up, if the expectation is we don't have these, it starts to change. I don't know if I'm answering your question there, Gene, but
it's really useful information. It's opening up a story for me that there's a question in the back end. So let me just frame in this story quickly. I have been a leadership coach for 12 plus years. I have hired other coaches, and we have a team of about 9 people right now. And I remember one of my employees, probably about week 4. So we're just getting to know each other, very smart, driven person. And she wasn't sure she could do something. And I thought I was inspiring her. I thought I was, pumping her up. I told her how smart I thought she was. And I really do think she's one of the smartest hires I've ever had. And I left that conversation not thinking anything. There was a little resistance there, but I didn't think anything. The next day we get on the call and she's like, I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, okay, sure. She's like, I felt like you were talking at me, not with me yesterday. Can we talk about it? And I'm like, sure. And I was like, oh, what did I do wrong? Because I'm supposed to have it dialed in, and I'm being vulnerable here with you because I'm your leadership coach, and you're smiling, and I'm I know people are listening into our conversation, but I stood with that with her and I said, well, what happened? I got curious, which is part of the framework inside my Tough Conversations book. Yeah. But she was engaging me, right? So she had the psychological safety to say, I felt like you're talking at me, not with me. And I thought I was just pumping her up and saying, no, I think you can handle this. Like, I'll be patient, take it and run. Yeah. But she felt differently. The funny thing is, that is not the way leaders respond to this most of the time. Most of the time, they get a little defensive, or they try to, cast it off that, you didn't understand me. It was a misunderstanding. But I feel like I demonstrated real leadership there, being I can take feedback. And I felt like that was a really good example of psychological safety. When you're working with leaders across your organization, here's the question. Yeah. How do you get them to take the feedback or that new idea that gets tossed out when they're not used to it? Because they're used to being the boss, or they're used to like kind of driving a hammer with everything. How do you handle that?
Yeah. First of all, great example. And it's funny, you talk about teaching leadership and doing that, but real leadership is that moment. It is, because you're a human being. We all, and different people perceive things in different ways. And yet what you did there is you're showing vulnerability, you're showing authenticity. If you genuinely are getting curious, and which it sounds like that's where you were at, it connects with people. Like it's a higher level response for most people. So, but going back to your question, it's funny. I think a lot of leadership often, and especially when we're, for example, within Facial Lounge, when we're developing a manager, we got a new management spot that we're looking to bring in. One of the first and primary things that we're looking to evaluate is emotional intelligence. We are looking at how do they emotionally handle situations, and what do they feel? What do people outside of them feel? How do those kind of collide? How do they work in that environment? And the one you're specifically talking about there is some level of self-management, right? So they're in a spot, something's coming at them. How do they stay calm in that moment? And you stayed in an analytical space of going, okay, obviously I'm not seeing everything. Tell me more, get curious. But what we do, all of us have these different triggers and these things that happen to us along the way, and a lot of them from childhood, and we go into life, and then we're put in a position of power. And really underneath, maybe we have some insecurities. Maybe underneath, I feel like I got imposter syndrome, or I'm not enough, or I don't know what's going on. And so in that leadership role, potentially I put on a mask, I put on a face. And that face is overly, I'm supposed to know everything, and I'm supposed to be in this spot, and it comes through potentially as ego or all these other things that can show up through it. And the only way you get to where you are, in my opinion, is if you actually deal with the underneath stuff of having true confidence and self-belief, so that you can be calm in those moments, and so that you're responding and reacting in a way that creates an outcome that you want, self-management. And a lot of us go through life, and we all have triggers, but a lot of us go through life and we have these big glaring triggers. And in a leadership role, that becomes a minefield for your team. They're going through and they're going, well, I don't want to upset them, or I don't want to say it this way. Well, there's no psychological safety if they're worried about whether or not they're going to upset you and say the wrong thing. I met a leader recently of a really incredible company, and their whole thing was, my team's not allowed to say certain words because they upset me. And I was like, okay, like what are the words? He goes like confusion. They're not allowed to tell me they're confused. And I go, okay, so what is, he goes, because they don't really mean confused. They mean something. I forget what he said. It's something else. And I was going, man, that's a lot. And if they use the wrong words, it was confused. It was confused. It was aligned. It was, I mean, some pretty common words within business, but they were and so the group knows to avoid them, but it's not a psychologically safe environment, not completely, where people feel safe because they know they have to dodge these things. So I guess where I'm going at it is, at the end of the day, we've got to have the self-management skills to get analytical enough to go get curious, to work within a framework like what you have, and to be able to step into it authentically and really hear what's going on and quiet the chatter that's taking place in our head. And a lot of times takes some inner work to actually dig in and see what's going on there.
We've had a great conversation here, Eric. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective, your company's journey with a culture of psychological safety.
Yeah. Thanks, Gene.
Wow, what a great interview. I love talking to other leadership coaches because that's his core business. And then he is also the CEO of the Facial Lounge Group, and really great conversation talking about the culture of psychological safety. Hopefully you got some insight today. If there's any way I can help you out, make sure you let me know. And when you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.